Resuming debate, the honourable member for Caribou Prince George.
Bravo! Bravo!
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today and speak to Bill C-49. Now, we're all painfully aware of this Liberal government's track record when it comes to tabling confusing legislation. More gatekeepers, more red tape, longer delays, and the politicization of decision-making. Canadians everywhere are tired of the Prime Minister who scares businesses away from investing in our country. They're tired of stifling bureaucracy and costly Liberal bills. And, Madam Speaker, this bill is full of this. This Prime Minister and his Liberal government have been in power for 8 long years, Madam Speaker, and they have nothing to show on the renewable energy front and have made no progress on attracting investment to Canada's energy sector. Quite the contrary. So forgive me for being somewhat skeptical about the state of this current legislation as it's written. We've seen this dog and pony show over the last 8 years, over and over again. Bill C-55, Bill C-68, C-69, just to name a few. They consult, they equivocate, they blur the lines, they do everything they can to muddy the water except get the job done. C-49 proposes to make the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board and the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board regulators. At the same time, it creates a regulatory framework for offshore wind and renewable energy, the regulation of which will be added to their mandates. As my colleagues have stated before on this subject, the Liberals have finally decided to include the provincial governments as partners in decisions affecting their jurisdiction. Of course, they didn't do this with C-69, and we all know where that unconstitutional legislation stands. C-49 would triple the current regulatory timeline for project approval. I'll say that again. C-49 will triple the current regulatory timeline for project approval. Currently, the provincial review boards have the final say on the approval or rejection of a project, at which point the relevant provincial or federal ministers are given a 30-day period to respond before the decision is finalized. Under C-49, ministers are given 60 days to respond with the possibility of a further 30-day extension and actually a further possibility of an indefinite extension. Thanks to nearly a decade of this Prime Minister, Canada is a country that is characterized by a strict and stifling red tape regime. We are now amongst the most costly and regulated business environment in the world, Madam Speaker. They continue to attack traditional energy development, trying to recklessly phase it out to the detriment of all. I'll remind this House that in his first public speaking, this Prime Minister, after his election in 2015, this Prime Minister's goal was to apologize for Canada's natural resources, saying he wanted Canadians to be known more for our resourcefulness than our natural resources under his government. Madam Speaker, it doesn't get much more out of touch than that. They say they want to boost alternative energy, yet they use a bill like this to suffocate it in regulation and red tape. The proposed framework is not only one that creates more bureaucracy and red tape, but one that politicizes each and every step of the decision-making process. By giving final authority to federal and provincial ministers, the regulators are reduced to the position of only giving recommendations to the government. To be clear, Canada's Conservatives support the responsible exploration and development of offshore resources, but we also believe it should be done responsibly through an arm's-length regulatory process, not political decision-making. Even more disturbing aspect of this legislation is its potential to be used to impose a complete shutdown on offshore oil and gas developments at any time. I'll say this again. This bill could end offshore petroleum extraction in Atlantic provinces for good at the whim of a minister. This bill is a direct attack on one of Newfoundland and Labrador's key industries, one that generates billions of dollars of revenue and thousands of jobs. Section 28 and 137 allows the federal cabinet to halt either an offshore drilling or renewable energy project if the area, and I quote, may be identified as a marine protected area, in the opinion of cabinet. Now, Madam Speaker, I'll bring you back to Bill C-55, one which the Conservatives staunchly opposed, which allows the Fisheries Minister to unilaterally declare an area to be a marine protected area, essentially using the precautionary principle to shut down projects. In the absence of any scientific proof, C-49 does exactly the same, and this should scare every Atlantic Canadian. You have a unilateral decision by a minister that's not based on science, which leads to an arbitrary opinion from the cabinet, which leads to the shutdown of a vital offshore resource development project that our country desperately needs. Madam Speaker, this is not the way to govern if Canada ever hopes to attract business and investment in our energy sector. Furthermore, this cancellation process for new or currently operating projects provides no meaningful consultation with Indigenous or community interests whatsoever. There is zero responsibility for any stakeholder consultation. This abdication of responsibility, this failure to fulfill the Crown's duty to consult with Indigenous interests, may also invite extensive court challenges leading to further delays, as was the case with the Trans Mountain Pipeline debacle. As I alluded to before, Madam Speaker, there is also a number of practicalities that beg for clarification with this bill. For instance, the bill requires some degree of federal funding to cover the expansion of mapping by the regulators, as well as the expansion of offshore activities generally. As for these financial implications, there is no specific funding allocated. We must also question whether the regulators will need additional personnel for technical expertise, along with additional funding to allow them to properly fulfill their new responsibilities under their new mandate. If so, where is this money coming from? Is it even realistic to expect the regulators to be prepared in a timely fashion to deal with this new work that is currently outside of their scope? C-49 leaves much to be desired in the way of clarity, Madam Speaker. After 8 long years of this Prime Minister, Canadians should be very wary of a government that says, don't worry about the details, we'll deal with them later. They need answers now. They deserve answers now, answers which this government must be prepared to provide this House. I was hoping the government would learn from its failure with Bill C-69, which has had the same lack of detail on crucial issues, uncertainty about roles and responsibilities, and vague timelines. But this legislation shows that they have learned absolutely nothing, which comes as no surprise. Madam Speaker, we see the same inefficiencies of C-69 imported into C-49. Not only do the provisions from the Impact Assessment Act allow the federal minister to interfere in any given project if they deem it, quote, in the public interest, but it also allows them to create any arbitrary conditions to which a project proponent must comply. How does that create confidence or certainty for investors? Isn't it the responsibility of a government to create an environment where businesses want to invest, where businesses want to create jobs and opportunities for Canadians? This Prime Minister seems to have forgotten this part of his very own mandate. These provisions go further, Madam Speaker, allowing the minister to again impose arbitrary conditions during project review, which serve to further delay timelines for unspecified amount of time, potentially even years. This will only drive industry away from Canada. It provides absolutely no certainty to these businesses that want to invest potentially billions and billions of dollars in our country. Madam Speaker, it can't be overstated how detrimental the consequences of more liberal uncertainty are. Shamefully, this has been the effect of taking Canada out of the global competition for energy development, both traditional and alternative, when instead we should be a global leader. But going back to my earlier comments, Madam Speaker, perhaps this is exactly what the Prime Minister meant. Not once has he championed the Canadian energy sector on the world stage. Instead, he apologized for our existence, which only drives investment to other countries and squanders opportunities for Canadian workers. We have the resources, we have the workforce, the industry leaders. We can be a global leader in the energy sector. Instead, this Prime Minister prefers to cede market shares to overseas dictators whose environmental and human rights standards are non-existent. It's time to put Canadian energy first. It's time to put Canadian jobs first. And it's time, Madam Speaker, to put Canadians first. It's time to bring home powerful paychecks. We need a Conservative Prime Minister that will greenlight new technologies, reduce approval timelines, and remove the Liberal gatekeepers so that major energy and infrastructure projects can finally be built in this country once again. Madam Speaker, with that, I'd like to move the motion, seconded by the member from Lakeland, that the bill be amended by deleting all the words after the word "that" and substitute the following: the House declined to give second reading to Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts since Sections 61 to 64 of Bill C-69, an act to enact the Impact Assessment Act and the Canadian Energy Regulator Act to amend the Navigation Protection Act and to make consequential amendments to other acts have been ruled to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of Canada, and those same sections are embedded in Bill C-49.
Exactly.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Bravo.
Mr. Doherty, seconded by Mrs. Stubbs, moves the following amendment. The House declined to give a second reading to Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts, since Sections 61 to 64 of Bill C-69, an act to enact the Impact Assessment Act and the Canadian Energy Regulator Act, to amend the Navigation Protection Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts have been ruled to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of Canada, and those same sections are embedded in Bill C-49. Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to get more into detail shortly, but I just wanted to get the members' thoughts in terms of a specific quote. And this comes from an individual, and I'll give the name right away, is in regards to this particular bill. And it says that Newfoundland and Labrador is pleased with the federal government's proposed amendments to the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and look forward to seeing them passed. This comes from Premier Andrew Freary. Madam Speaker, there is so many other quotes that I'll hold back right now, but I hope to get on the record shortly. And I'm wondering if the member has any thoughts in regards to the consensus that has been built on this legislation to see it pass into committee stage. Does he support any of those stakeholders?
Member for Caribou Prince George.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank our honourable colleague for that question. Now, the honourable Premier from Premier Fury has stated that he wants this bill and needs this bill to pass for clarity, for their own well-being. But, Madam Speaker, it's our job in this House to clear up any confusion. Madam Speaker, the Supreme Court ruled 5-2 that C-69 was unconstitutional. Over a third of C-49 includes policy and procedures from C-69. Madam Speaker, we need to fix this bill now before it goes out to goes beyond. So thank you thank you for that, Madam Speaker.
Comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable for Windsor West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I asked my colleague, with regards to this, there's consensus on the bill with regards to the provincial elements. And so if this is not going to be something they support, what would they offer as an alternative? Because it would be interesting to hear their response with regards to, if not this, then what's the next step? Thank you.
The honourable for Caribou Prince George.
Just to be on record, Madam Speaker, Conservatives 100% that provincial ministers have a say at what goes on in their neck of the woods. What drives us crazy and causes pause for creates pause for concern is that absolutely no responsibility or there's no responsibility built into C-49 for the government and the regulators to do any stakeholder consultation. So we absolutely want the provincial ministers to have a say. They know what's best in their communities and in their province. But Madam Speaker, C-49 provides none of that.
And comments, the honourable member of Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to my honourable friend from Caribou Prince George, I did oppose Bill C-69. Some of your colleagues have said if you voted for it, then you obviously don't understand environmental assessment. I do support Bill C-49. The Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore and Canada, Newfoundland, Labrador Offshore Petroleum Boards a need to have an expanded regulatory capacity to approve offshore wind. And I wanted to know if you wouldn't agree with me that the tremendous potential for the economy in Atlantic Canada is in wind-generated hydrogen.
Member for Caribou Prince George.
I appreciate our honourable colleague from Saanich Gulf Islands for her comment. You know, in June of earlier this year, our leader said, under my government, we'll greenlight green technology and allow for our brilliant engineers to invent the technologies that will bring about cleaner, greener, and more affordable electricity. What stands in this way? Duplicitous bureaucracy in the government gatekeepers. That is exactly what we're seeing with C-49, Madam Speaker. It provides no certainty to those stakeholders and the communities at which this bill will impact the most, and gives arbitrary responsibility or power and authority to a minister without scientific proof, just to designate an area, a marine protected area, and to absolutely kill any opportunity, Madam Speaker, and that is fundamentally wrong. Thank you.
For a very brief question, the gentleman for Edmonton West.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his wonderful speech. You may remember there was a young MP once from Prince George who uncovered the Liberal scandal that became known as clam scam. Now, I wonder if he could fill us in on what his concerns are, perhaps under this bill, where a Liberal minister, without any authorization on their own, can interfere with the goings on in Newfoundland when we've seen their actions.
Answer from the member for Caribou Prince George.
Madam Speaker, and I thank our honourable colleague for that. There was a young member of Parliament at the time, probably a few pounds lighter at the same time, that did uncover or discover an issue called clam scam, where we had a federal minister that decided to award a contract worth millions upon millions of dollars to a sitting MP's brother and a former MP's former MP, all through the Liberal patronage, Madam Speaker. So this, again, this wait and see and let us deal with the issues later. Just trust us, Madam Speaker. Trust is earned. It's not just given. Thank you.
Resuming debate, the honourable